João Marcos, a successful lawyer in the bustling city of São Paulo, was accustomed to living in a world where logic and power were the only laws that mattered. At 45, he was a robust man with a piercing gaze and a firm voice. His expensive suits and authoritative posture were the hallmarks of someone who knew no defeat in court. Since the tragic loss of his wife, Helena, in a car accident, João had become emotionally isolated. The pain of the loss turned him bitter and distant, and he immersed himself even more in his work, using it as an escape valve. His relationship with his daughter, Clara, became strained, as the 17-year-old had a completely different worldview than his. Clara was empathetic, idealistic, and always sought to help others, often questioning her father's actions. On a day like any other, João followed his usual route to the office, cutting through the city's central square. The sun was still rising, and the city was beginning to bustle with its morning routine. As he walked through the square, he saw a group of black teenagers gathered in a corner. João looked at them with disdain, immediately associating their presence with problems and delinquency, the result of his deep-rooted prejudices. Lucas, a 14-year-old boy with curly hair and bright eyes, was among them. He wore a worn-out t-shirt and worn-out pants, but he had an expression of determination and seriousness unusual for his age. He was helping to organize a small soccer game, a community activity to keep the young people busy and out of trouble. "Those delinquents are always out there, disturbing the peace," João muttered, quickening his pace to avoid the group. Clara, who had been with him that morning, stopped and observed the young people with a more compassionate and curious look. "Dad, don't you think you're being unfair? You don't even know them." "Maybe they're just having fun," Clara said, trying to plant a seed of reflection in her father's hardened heart. João ignored the remark and continued walking towards the imposing building where his office was located. Upon entering, he quickly greeted the receptionist and headed to his office, a luxurious and minimalist space, full of awards and certificates that showcased his professional success. However, Clara's words echoed in his mind throughout the day. No matter how hard he tried to focus on the important cases at hand, he could not shake the image of the boy in the square and the tone of disapproval in his daughter's voice. At the end of the day, already at home, João found Clara in the living room, reading a book on human rights. The scene was familiar, but this time, he felt a pang of guilt. He realized that, despite his brilliant career, he was distancing himself from his daughter and the values she held dear. That night, lying in bed, João reflected on his life and his choices. He knew that his coldness and indifference protected him from pain, but they also distanced him from everything that really mattered. He decided that, no matter how hard it was, he needed to try to change, even if just a little, in order to reconnect with Clara and his own lost humanity. While João struggled with his inner demons, fate began to weave the threads that would lead him on an unexpected journey of self-discovery and redemption. Initiated by that simple encounter in the square, João Marcos woke up the next morning still immersed in reflections about his life and his choices. Clara, his daughter, was determined to make him see the world in a different way. After a restless night's sleep, João was surprised by his daughter's enthusiasm during breakfast. "Dad, the NGO Human Rights and Justice asked me to help with an important case. They are trying to prevent the unjust eviction of a family. I thought it would be a great opportunity for you to help too," Clara said, her eyes shining with hope. João frowned. He normally did not accept pro bono cases, especially those involving human rights. However, something in Clara's determination touched him. Reluctantly, he accepted, but made it clear that he was doing it only for her. Arriving at the NGO headquarters, João was introduced to the case by the volunteer lawyers. Dona Maria, a 45-year-old woman, worked as a cleaner to support her two children, Lucas and Ana. The owner of the property where they lived was trying to illegally evict them in order to sell the land to a large developer. João listened to the story with an expression of disdain at first, but the details began to capture his attention. During the first meeting with the family, João got to know Lucas better. The boy, whom he had despised in the square, turned out to be much more complex than João had imagined. Lucas was intelligent, curious, and responsible. He helped his mother with the housework and took care of his younger sister, Ana. while still managing to maintain good grades at school. Donna Maria, a strong and resilient woman, she told João about the hardships she faced every day. She worked long hours to ensure that her children had the bare minimum. Her story was one of struggle and sacrifice, and little by little, João began to see beyond his own prejudices. Clara, who accompanied João to all the meetings, observed the subtle changes in her father's behavior. She saw how he, initially skeptical and cold, began to show signs of empathy. Clara's determination to make João see the humanity in those he had previously despised was beginning to bear fruit. As João reviewed the case documents, he realized the gravity of the situation. The landlord was using legal maneuvers to force the family to leave, exploiting their vulnerability. João, with his vast experience and legal skills, knew he could make a difference. During one of his visits to the family home, João began to notice details that had previously escaped him. He saw the old photographs on the walls, testimonies of a life full of love and struggle. He saw Lucas helping Ana with her homework, a devoted and protective brother. He saw Dona Maria, exhausted but still full of hope. These small moments touched something deep inside him. Clara, for her part, was proud of her father. She knew that change would not be quick or easy, but she was determined to continue encouraging him. For her, seeing João get involved with Lucas's family was a sign that there was still hope that he could become a more compassionate and just man. As the weeks passed, João dedicated himself to the case with an intensity that surprised even himself. He began to see the injustices that so many people face daily, something that before he had deliberately ignored. The ruthless lawyer who only cared about money and power was slowly changing. João realized that he was not only helping Lucas's family, but he was also helping himself. He was rediscovering parts of himself that he had buried after Helena's death. He was rediscovering his capacity for empathy, compassion, and justice. As the case progressed, João knew that he was facing a pivotal moment in his life. He was about to face not just a legal challenge, but a journey of redemption and personal transformation. And without knowing it, he was beginning a path that would lead him to one of the greatest revelations of his life. The following weeks were intense for João Marcos. He dedicated himself to the case of Lucas's family with a passion and determination he had not felt in a long time. Meetings with the family, court sessions, and conversations with Clara brought back memories and emotions that he thought he had buried along with his wife. One night, while working in the office, João was surprised by a photograph that fell out of one of the old files he was reviewing. The photo showed a group of smiling friends at a picnic many years ago. In the center of the image were João and his old childhood friend, Pedro, with whom he had lost contact years ago. Beside Pedro, a small boy with curly hair smiled at the camera. João was instantly reminded of Pedro's missing son, who had mysteriously disappeared when he was just 2 years old. João found himself reflecting on his friend and how life had separated them. He remembered the countless conversations they had had about Pedro's desperate search for his son. With an unsettling feeling, he noticed similarities between the boy in the photo and Lucas. The facial features, the curly hair, something about him was strangely familiar. Determined to find out more, João spent the following days searching for information about Pedro. He used his connections and investigative skills to track down his friend's whereabouts. After a few phone calls and research, he finally found a clue. Pedro was living in a small town in the interior of São Paulo, still searching for his son. Upon meeting Pedro again, the two friends shared an emotional embrace. Pedro was older and worn by time, but his eyes still carried the hope of finding his lost son. João felt a wave of nostalgia and regret for having been apart for so long. Sitting in a small cafe, Pedro told João about the years of suffering and relentless searching. He showed him photos and documents that he had kept dearly, in the hope of one day being reunited with his son. John, with a heavy heart, decided to share his suspicions. "Peter, I think I found your son," John said, his voice shaking. "There's a boy named Lucas who's involved in a case I'm working on. He looks a lot like your son." Peter was shocked, his eyes filling with tears. "Are you sure, John? I can't allow myself to have false hopes again. Let's do a DNA test to find out for sure." "For sure," suggested John. "If he really is your son, We need to act quickly to protect him and make sure he is safe." Peter agreed, and over the next few days, John made arrangements for the DNA test. Luke and Donna Maria, still unsure of what it was, agreed to provide samples. The wait for the results was agonizing for both friends. While they waited, John began to spend more time with Luke, observing him closely. He saw how the boy cared for his sister, how he faced life's challenges with courage and resilience. John felt a mix of emotions: guilt for his previous judgments, hope that Luke was really Peter's son, and determination to do the right thing. Finally, the day of the results arrived. John and Peter gathered in John's office, anxious and apprehensive. When the envelope was opened, the results confirmed what John suspected. Luke was Peter's missing son. The revelation was a moment of intense emotion. Pedro fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, thanking God for finally finding his son. João, although relieved, felt an even greater weight of responsibility. He knew that this was just the beginning of a new journey for all of them. Lucas, upon being told the truth, was initially confused and overwhelmed. The discovery of his true identity brought forth a mixture of feelings: relief, fear, hope, and doubt. Donna Maria, who had raised him as her own son, was also deeply moved. She thanked João for everything he had done, recognizing the importance of his intervention. For João, that moment represented a decisive turning point in his life. He had rediscovered not only the humanity he thought he had lost, but also a greater purpose. The search for justice and reconnection with the values that Clara had always defended became his new guiding light. And so, with his past unearthed and a new mission ahead of him, João prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead, determined to protect Lucas, support Pedro, and, finally, find redemption on a journey that was just beginning. João's office was filled with palpable tension that morning. Pedro, sitting at his desk, could not hide his anxiety, while João tried to maintain a facade of professional calm. However, the uneasiness was evident in his eyes and in the nervous movements of his hands. This moment had the potential to change lives irrevocably. When the messenger handed over the envelope containing the DNA test results, João took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility in his hands. He knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to right a wrong of the past for both Pedro and Lucas. Pedro, in turn, gripped the arm of his chair so tightly that his knuckles were white, his eyes fixed on the envelope as if his life depended on it. And, in a way, it did. João carefully opened the envelope and removed the paper, reading the results before speaking. He looked at Pedro, his eyes meeting his old friend's with an intensity that said it all. "Pedro, the test came back positive. Lucas is your son." Pedro collapsed, falling to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He was filled with an overwhelming mixture of relief, joy, and sadness. Years of pain, hope, and despair had culminated in that moment. John felt a lump in his throat, but he held firm, knowing that he still had a crucial role to play. Lucas, who had been called into the office without knowing exactly why, entered and was met with the dramatic scene. He saw Pedro crying and João holding a paper with a grave expression on his face. The realization that something monumental was happening began to form in his mind. João, trying to be as sensitive as possible, began to explain the situation. "Lucas, we need to talk to you about something very important," João began, his voice soft but firm. "This is Pedro, an old friend of mine. Many years ago, he lost his son in tragic circumstances. We did a DNA test to confirm a suspicion and discovered that you are that son, Lucas." Lucas stood still, his mind struggling to process the information. He looked at Pedro, whose eyes were filled with desperate hope and restrained joy. I don't understand," Lucas murmured, his voice shaking. Peter, still kneeling, looked directly at Lucas. "Son, I've searched for you for so long. I never gave up. And now, finally, I've found you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Lucas's initial confusion began to dissipate as he processed what he was hearing. This man before him, who seemed like a stranger, was speaking with a familiarity and emotion that struck Lucas deeply. He felt a mixture of disbelief, fear, and a curious sense of recognition. Dona Maria, who was also called, she went to the office to hear the news and entered and saw Lucas standing there, stunned, while Pedro and João watched intently. João explained the situation to her as well, with all the sensitivity he could muster. Tears began to roll down Dona Maria's face, and she hugged Lucas tightly, feeling at the same time the joy and pain of the revelation. "Lucas, I raised you as my son, and I will always be your mother," Dona Maria said, her voice trembling. "But now you know the truth about your origins." Lucas, still in a state of shock, approached Pedro. "Are you my father?" he asked, still trying to believe the truth he had just discovered. "Yes, son. It's me," Pedro replied, tears in his eyes. "And I will do everything I can to make up for lost time." The meeting was a whirlwind of emotions, but it marked the beginning of a new phase in the lives of everyone present. João, observing the scene, felt a profound change within himself. He knew that he was faced with an opportunity for redemption, not only for Pedro and Lucas, but for himself as well. In the days that followed, João dedicated himself even more to Lucas's family's case, determined to protect them and ensure that they could start a new life together. He began to see Lucas as more than a client. He was now a link to the past and a promise for the future. This monumental discovery was only the beginning of a journey of reconnection, redemption, and new beginnings. João, Pedro, Lucas, and Dona Maria would face many challenges, but the truth revealed in that office was the first step toward a brighter and more just future for all. After the shocking revelation about Lucas's true identity, João, Pedro, and Dona Maria met to plan their next steps. There was much to discuss and decide, especially regarding Lucas's future and the impending legal battle to prevent the family's eviction. João decided to hold a meeting at his home so that everyone could talk in a more welcoming environment. He wanted to ensure that Pedro and Lucas had a chance to get to know each other better without the pressure of the courts and the legal profession. Clara, always sensitive to the emotions of others, prepared a special dinner to make the occasion more comfortable and welcoming. When Pedro arrived at João's house, accompanied by Lucas and Dona Maria, he seemed nervous but determined. Lucas was visibly calmer, although there was still confusion and curiosity in his eyes. Clara welcomed them warmly, sensing the tension in the air and doing her best to lighten the mood. During dinner, the conversation began timidly, but gradually, Pedro and Lucas began to share stories. Pedro told Lucas about the years he spent searching for him, about the pain of loss and the hope that never left him. Lucas, in turn, spoke about his life with Dona Maria, about the difficulties they faced and how he always felt loved and protected. Dona Maria, moved, said to Pedro, "I always knew there was something special about Lucas, and now I know that he was destined to find you again. Although it was difficult, I don't regret anything. He's a good boy, and I'm sure he'll grow up to be a great man." Clara watched with a smile on her face. She saw her father beginning to open up, to let go of his rigid posture, and to connect with others on a deeper level. She felt a sense of pride and hope, believing that this was the change that João needed so badly. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where the conversation continued. João suggested that they make a detailed plan for the eviction case. He was determined to use all his legal skills to ensure that Lucas's family would be able to keep their home. "Let's start with a thorough review of all the documents and contracts," João said, picking up a folder full of papers. "We need to find any loopholes or irregularities that we can use to our advantage. Pedro, you can help with the background check on the landlord. Clara, I'd like you to help with research on similar cases and legal precedents. Dona Maria, we need any details you can give us about your interactions with the landlord and any evidence of misconduct." Everyone agreed to collaborate, forming a new, determined, and focused alliance. Pedro promised to use his experience as a former private investigator to help with the investigation, while Clara dedicated herself to finding legal precedents that could strengthen the case. Lucas, despite his youth, wanted to help in some way. João, noticing the boy's enthusiasm, gave him the task of organizing and cataloging all the documents and evidence. "Lucas, your attention to detail will be crucial. We need everything well organized so we don't miss anything important," João said, with an encouraging smile. As they worked together, João began to realize something that had been missing from his life for a long time. a sense of greater purpose, and a deeper connection with others. He saw how each member of the group brought something unique and valuable to the table, and how powerful collaboration and unity were. The following nights were filled with meetings and strategic discussions. John and Peter spent hours reviewing documents, while Clara and Lucas dedicated themselves to research and organization. Donna Maria shared stories and details that helped paint a more complete picture of the property owner and his tactics. On one of these nights, John had a heart-to-heart talk with Clara. "Daughter, I know I've been distant and insensitive for too long. Dad, I always knew you had this potential inside of you. I'm proud of you for taking this step. We're in this together." He was becoming more open, more compassionate, and more aware of the injustices around him. John, now more motivated and determined than ever, led the team with a new vision of justice and compassion. Determined to give Lucas a better life, John and Peter began working together to help Lucas's family. Little by little, he began to build a bond with the boy, who began to see him as a father figure. Clara, although happy with her father's change, struggled to accept that he had truly changed. She feared that it was all just a passing phase. During a family dinner, Clara confronted João about his past and present behavior. João, in a moment of sincerity, confessed his mistakes and asked his daughter for forgiveness. Lucas, who was present, was also moved. He thanked João for everything he was doing for his family and expressed his desire to get to know him better. His transformation inspired many people around him, including his co-workers. João's journey was not only a personal transformation, but also a significant change in his community. He became an example of how empathy and compassion can transform lives and promote social justice. Lucas, now with a promising future, decided to follow in João's footsteps and become a lawyer. He wanted to help others who faced injustice, just as his family once did. João, Clara, Pedro, and Lucas formed a new family, united by love and the fight for a better world. Together, they faced the challenges of the past and looked to the future with hope and determination.